welcome. It's my great honor and privilege to be sitting down with Reverend Diane Berke. And it's such an honor, and I'm so excited to be sitting down with you today, Diane. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, Ben.
I think we first met back in around 2015 or maybe 2016 in New York at an interfaith prayer breakfast, I think it was. Or was it an interspiritual breakfast? Kurt Johnson dragged me along, and there you were. And this, huge figure as the founder of One Spirit Seminary. But many of my friends have attended, and many luminous people have gone through. And Diane, it's in that sense, it's a real privilege to be sitting down with you today to have this conversation around these big subjects, around the nature of divinity, around ideas about God and truth and reality. And with your rich lived experience, both in your inner journey and then in your work in the world as a founder and president of One Spirit Seminary, director and spiritual director, what a great opportunity this is for us to sit at your feet in this sense a little bit and to learn what you have experienced through your firsthand experience, and then through the the rich spiritual and intellectual journeys that you have undertaken. So I wanted to begin, Diane, this conversation in a way of inviting you to share with us how did you come to be who you are today in your spiritual path? What inspired you to found this incredible seminary in New York, which has been such a bright light in so many different ways, and in particular in the interspiritual world, which we are very much a part of. So would love to hear your journey and your flow of your life until now, and the things that have inspired you the most in your spiritual walk.
Thank you, Ben. So I was born and raised in a Jewish family in a fairly small town at the time in Pennsylvania. I was very blessed in that my maternal grandparents, particularly my maternal grandfather, was really an example of the best of what religion has to offer. His faith, his practice led him to be a genuinely loving, generous, kind, compassionate, caring human being, which for me really became the measure of what it means to be someone living a spiritual life. Interestingly, the town I grew up in the 1950s had a strong interfaith spirit. People from the local church would come to a Friday night service at the synagogue. People from the synagogue would attend a Sunday morning service at the church. There was a real interest in learning about other people's traditions. At that time, it was mainly just Christian Jewish. But still, that was there. And my own understanding of my Jewish upbringing was, I would say, very grounded in a kind of very universal thread of Judaism, and really every religion has a universal thread and a particularistic thread. And my understanding of Judaism was really the universal thread. Don't we all have one source? Therefore, aren't we all one family? Isn't creation one family? And that was my understanding of what Judaism was teaching.
Yeah.
In the interfaith spirit, I remember as a little girl in Sunday school being taken to different houses of worship. And I thought that what I was supposed to feel was respectful. But that wasn't the entirety of my experience. My experience was I felt at home. And I felt guilty about that. I thought I'm supposed to feel at home in the synagogue. I'm supposed to feel respectful in these other places, but that wasn't what was true for me. And for the longest time, I didn't know what to do with that experience. I remember also being very influenced by a book called The Family of Man, which was a photographic essay and a photographic exhibition that toured. But it was a beautiful, beautiful book of photographs of people and cultures from all over the world experiencing the full range of human emotions. And I would spend hours poring over that book with it just saying to me, yes, we are all at our deepest core, we're all the same human beings. When I was in high school, I went through probably what a lot of young people go through, which was a disillusionment, because the discrepancy between what I was being taught and how I actually saw people treating each other felt so great that I felt, oh, this religion stuff is a complete hypocrisy. Yeah. And by the time I finished high school and went off to college, my own search turned away from religion, and my interest turned to psychology, emotional development, psychotherapy, healing, all of those kinds of things. Although I had a very close friend in college who was very involved in the Catholic Cursillo movement, and we would have wonderful spiritual conversations, and he invited me to a Cursillo weekend. I think I was the second Jewish person who attended, and just loved it. Eventually, I went through a disillusionment with psychology as well, in the sense of I saw that beyond a certain point, being in touch emotionally could become self-indulgent. And I sensed that there had to be something beyond that, but I didn't know what it was, which ended up launching me back on a spiritual search. And long story short, I was attending Unity services in New York with Eric Butterworth. And as I was sitting there one day, I had a very strong inner sense, become a minister.
Wow.
Which was shocking because I was still identified as Jewish and I associated ministry with Christianity. But it was clearly not become a rabbi. It was become a minister. And I thought, if this is genuine guidance, something will show up eventually that will show me a path for this. Because I looked into divinity schools and none of that, I knew none of that was the right way. Through a series of synchronicities, I learned about an interfaith seminary. And the minute I heard the term interfaith ministry, I knew that's what I had been waiting for. So I went through the program, was ordained, was invited onto the staff of that school, where I worked for the next 15 years. And then shortly before 9/11, I encountered Wayne Teasdale's book, The Mystic Heart.
Oh, wow.
And the word interspirituality just shimmered for me. And I thought, that is so much truer to what I'm sensing, to what we're trying to do here, than the traditional sense of interfaith dialogue. So I left that organization and was moved to Found One Spirit, which I did in 2002.
Wow. Wow. Well, Diane, thank you for that beautiful, journey through the years, bringing us up to that moment in 2002 when you were called, so deeply called. I love, the importance of spiritual friendship that you talked about with your Catholic friend, and the different points along the way where the inspiration comes and the message comes. And sometimes it's surprising and it's the last thing we're expecting. And it's like, what, really? And then yet there's a depth of knowing that it's so profoundly right, that you've then followed through on that with great courage. And I'm sure it wasn't always easy to move between these worlds, both the faith-based worlds, the secular world, so psychology, and it can be very, it can be, all of them can be strong subcultures that are very attached to keeping people within certain boundaries. So you've been crossing those boundaries all the time, and I'm sure there's been many moments of having to step upon a threshold and face all sorts of resistance, both outside and I'm sure at some dimensions internally as well through that process. I love how our biographies inform our cosmologies and our theologies. Yes. It's a never-ending journey. So take us to 2002, the founding of One Spirit. I want to go a little deeper into that. This is a big step. I mean, you've been in the interfaith ministry world for 15 years. You're now leaving that after the inspiration of the Mystic Heart, which, we're coming up to a jubilee or a celebration of that, an anniversary of that publication, which has inspired this anthology from Kurt Johnson, which is coming out about the sort of state and the future of the interspiritual movement. So this is so rich. Tell us about that process. I know it's a deep chapter of your life, but just in terms of what were the significant things about stepping out and starting something from nothing, and how did you do it?
It was blessed every step of the way. The last 4 years that I was in the other organization, I was the director of that school. And I had inherited a board of trustees, a board of directors from the founder of that school. Mm-hmm. And they were lovely human beings who were primarily much older white men. Mm-hmm. who just as time went on, it was clear we were on a different page. And I spent quite a bit of time trying to sense whether it was possible to make change within that organization internally. And as it was becoming clear that that was not possible, a benefactor came forward and said to me, if you want to and feel a need to start something of your own, I will support you.
Oh, wow.
So that was, it could not have happened without her. And I was shaking in my boots the entire process because about 90+% of the staff from the old school came with me, even though there was no guarantee we were going to be able to get off the ground within a matter of months, which is actually what happened. So we ended up starting One Spirit in September of 2002. 75 students from the old school came with us to complete their second year training with us. And over 50 students took a chance on this just birthed being. And yeah, so I sometimes think we sprung fully formed from the head of Zeus.
It sounds like it. It sounds like it. Well, it was just, meant to be and was destined to be. It sounds like, Diane. Wow. What a process of creation and co-creation to lead the birth of something like that. What a beautiful thing. And just for those who may not know One Spirit Seminary in New York, tell us, since then, in the 20 odd years that One Spirit has been going, how many ministers, interfaith or interspiritual ministers, have come through the Institute?
Probably about 1,500.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And there are quite a few in Australia, where you are, and New Zealand.
Yes.
We have some graduates in Europe, South America, primarily the United States, across the United States.
Yeah, it's amazing, Diane. Absolutely. Deep bows to you. That is such a beautiful, fruitful, contribution so needed to the world. The work of bringing together, understanding among the traditions, and even broadening the definition of which traditions belong to the great family assets of humanity when it comes to our vast spiritual resources, going all the way back to ageless indigenous wisdom and right up to new revelations. It's interesting. You're a student of Course in Miracles. I read the Urantia book. These are 20th century versions of spiritual inspiration. It's a never-ending, unfolding process. But what a beautiful contribution you are and continue to make through One Spirit Seminary.
Thank you.
So I wanted to now ask you your wisdom and insights and your own, as you've had this incredible experience of your own journey of creating this amazing thing in One Spirit Seminary. How has your ideas or your relationship to God evolved? You may not even use that word, but in terms of, how has your spiritual frameworks been challenged and being expanded and it kind of in their own way gone forth to where you are today? How has, coming from a Jewish background, having an interfaith sensibility, feeling at home in the Christian services, having the Catholic friend, all these different things, and then the big, founding of this One Spirit Ceremony, where you then come into contact, where you had already been a director, but then coming into contact with all these different minds and ideas and spiritualities, and sort of continuing to find a place where they can all belong in this big tent. How has your own personal spiritual frameworks and understandings of ultimate reality transformed as you've gone along?
It's so interesting, Bennett. Your question makes me remember a conversation that I had with another Course in Miracles teacher many years ago. And he and I were speaking, and he said to me, Diane, I'm a philosopher. And what I care about is it true with a capital T? And I said, that's so interesting, Robert. I'm a therapist. And what really concerns me is it helpful with a capital H? So I find that my own spiritual interests and journey are much less focused on sort of philosophical or theological questions, and much more on what allows us as human beings to live into and express the highest potentials of our own nature. What allows us to live in the world as decent, loving, compassionate, caring, generous human beings who, I think that certainly the Jewish concept of tikkun olam of the repair of the world, and uh, and to whatever extent we're able to bring forth an experience of heaven here on earth has really been much more of a guiding light for me. I'm not even sure how I would describe my personal concept of God right now. I do find very helpful the old analogy of the men stationed along the body of the elephant.
Yeah.
And each one is asked to describe what an elephant is. The men are all blind, they can't see. And the man at the tail says, "Ooh, an elephant is like a rope." And at the back leg, an elephant is like a column of a building. And at an elephant is like a wall. And at the tusk, an elephant is like a sword. The trunk, an elephant is like a hose. And each one is absolutely telling the truth.
Yeah.
Honestly, clearly describing their perception based on their experience of what an elephant is. But none of them have the whole picture. And I think for me, what's so meaningful about that is that whatever God is, whatever the divine is so much larger than I believe we can possibly ever comprehend with our human minds and human consciousness. And so the idea that there are different perspectives and different experiences of God, depending on where we are positioned in relationship to whatever that is, has been very meaningful to me. And I've been influenced a lot by Ken Wilber's work on what he calls the three faces of God, or the three faces of spirit, that he says kind of follow in linguistics, first person, second person, and third person perspectives, so that the third person face of God, or face of spirit, is sort of the cosmos itself, is the impersonal the order, principle, the natural order of the cosmos and the universe that we can contemplate, we can reflect on, we can study, we can be in awe of, we can feel both how tiny we are in relationship to it and how integral a part of it we are. The second person perspective is God as you, God as thou, God as beloved father, mother, friend, God as child as we come up to the Christmas holiday. Sort of any kind of personal relationship we can have with God falls under this second person perspective, and it's very much about being in relationship. And then the first person perspective is the experience of God in a completely non-dual sense, the experience of God as the very ground of being itself, and recognizing that we share that being with everyone, with everything. That's sort of the place of beingness, presence, emness, isness, all of those experiences. So I would say at this point, I try to open myself to all of those perspectives through different practices, through different explorations, a lot through poetry, because one of the things I love in a Course in Miracles, it says, a universal theology is impossible. We will always have different beliefs and different concepts of what God is. But a universal experience is not only possible, but necessary. And one of the things I love about the interspiritual perspective is that it focuses much more at that level of experience. And the fact that we can recognize each other's experience, the deepest spiritual experiences, even when our theologies are very different, our belief systems may be very different, that a Buddhist experience of awakening can be recognized by a Christian mystic's experience, or a Jewish mystic's experience, or a Sufi's experience.
Oh, Diane, that is so many questions I have coming up out of that, which is really inspiring. I love the three faces of God. Ken Wilber is, speaking of helpful, some of his frameworks are so incredibly accurate in so many different ways and useful in so many different ways. And I think those three faces of God really do embrace the variety of modalities of how we as humans tend to interact. So thank you for that. That's beautiful. And I want to ask you about the divine feminine in a moment, but just something, you said then about the Christian mystic and the Sufi mystic and the Buddhist having an awakening experience. What about beyond all of the traditions? And people, do we need traditions at all? In the sense of, younger people now in my country and in your country are growing up probably without much connection to any of the traditions, even though they've got access to all of them. Very often may have zero interest or, real sort of pathway into them. What does the experience of awakening or the experience of having a divine mystical experience look like absent any of the traditions of humanity? Is that possible? And how can we serve those people that are or perhaps in that category that they're not connected to any of these traditions?
It's such a good question. I think we've been seeing more of that in the last 20 years or so. Really fine teachers who actually themselves delved deeply into traditions, but without identifying exclusively with a single tradition. So you have people now like Eckhart Tolle, like Rupert Spira, who are teaching a more direct, less theologically grounded approach to, particularly, I think, to non-dual experience. And the challenge, of course, is, we have these things called an ego, an identification with this separate individual sense of identity that can be very, very clever. And there's again a wonderful line in A Course in Miracles that says, the ego, under what it perceives as threat, is quick to cite the truth to defend its lies. And so it certainly is not limited to teachings outside of traditions. It can happen very much with teachings inside traditions as well, that spiritual teachings can be kind of hijacked by the ego
Yeah.
and used to reinforce our sense of separate identity and separate interests and all of that. But I think that perhaps that can be a greater danger if people are not grounded in, I won't say a tradition, but grounded in a path where there are people who have walked that path and can provide mature guidance and healthy guidance along the way.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you, Diane. That's a beautiful answer. As the world, I mean, it's interesting. It's always evolving, and the trends are moving and shifting and changing. Like these winds are always coming through. But I think, the work that you do into spirituality is only going to grow, and the roots going back into the soils of tradition and lineages is important nutrients for the whole system that lie therein. The rise of the divine feminine has been a beautiful and amazing and a powerful, and continues to be a phenomena that is such a healthy, in a way, balancing of millennia of patriarchy, and it's amazing to see. And I know this is a subject which you're passionate about, and in your way, expertise in this understanding the divine feminine. I want to ask you a little bit about that, Diane, and also, what questions does it then evoke about the healing of the divine masculine, or the understanding of the divine masculine, as we go forward from here?
One of the things that's always interesting to me is that it seems that the re-emergence of the divine feminine, in a sense, coincided with our landing on the moon, which, of course, is a symbol of the divine feminine. The sun being the symbol of the masculine, the moon being the symbol of the feminine, the active and the receptive, or the reflective. I don't even know what to say about it. I do think that one of the things that's important is to recognize that when we speak of the divine masculine and feminine, we're not specifically talking about gendered individuals, that all of us contain both the masculine energies and the feminine energies. I think that the Barbara Brown Taylor writes about how throughout history, throughout written history, we've had a very solar-oriented theology, the patriarchy, as you're saying. And that we are just learning now to appreciate the lunar quality, that quality of receptivity. I live in New York City for the last almost 50 years. And I often think of New York as being characterized by what I describe as sperm energy, which is millions of little beings racing around a zillion miles an hour, going in all directions, not really sure where they're going, but they just know they want to get there first.
Right. Yeah.
And when I moved here, I thought, if that's the only energy that's available, creation is never going to happen. Creativity can't happen because you need the egg, which is the energy that waits, that offers fertile, receptive ground. But it's not inert. It's a magnetic receptive energy that at the last minute selects one of the sperm and goes, and then germination occurs. So I think, we've become so out of balance with the energy of doing. And the divine feminine is bringing back in an appreciation for the energy of being, for preparing the soil to receive the seed. And so I think, each of us, that part of this balancing is for each of us to be willing to cultivate that energy of being, that energy of receptive presence within ourselves, so that we can bring things back into balance and be more available to the energy of creation.
Oh, that's beautiful, Diane. Thank you. That's a wonderful, rich analogy, and I'd not heard that before. And I'd not heard the linking between 1969 landing on the moon and the reemergence of the divine feminine. That is fascinating to consider. Thank you for that. And in the timeline that then goes to Wayne Teasdale's book in 2001, the same year of the World Trade Tower attacks, and now coming up to the 25th anniversary of both of those, historic occurrences. But in your very privileged viewpoint as the director and founder of One Spirit Seminary, the flow of the interspiritual movement, how you've seen it evolve, how you've seen it develop, and where are we going from here, Diane, is what I want to ask you. What do you see in your mystical, but also your lived experience about the future of where this is all taking us, and what are the possibilities and the promises of a growing interspiritual perspective on the planet, and in a sense the importance of that going forward over the next 25 years.
Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful question, and I wish I had an answer. I do think, in a sense, what I've seen historically has been sort of movement forward to a more universal perspective, and then a strong ego backlash. And a retreat into very nationalistic, very fundamentalistic. So I think that we're in a very difficult time. I don't see any kind of smooth trajectory, smooth positive trajectory into a universal familyhood of creation at this point. I do think that right now there are more and more people, though, who have that sensibility the cultural forces working against it now are so strong that what I see is more people coming together in smaller, more local ways. Meg Wheatley talks about creating what she calls islands of sanity, where our human capacity to be creative and generous and kind, for really the best in our nature to thrive and to flourish. It's almost like we need to create spaces and conditions in which we can really nourish and nurture that. Parker Palmer, who is a Quaker educator, one of the strongest influences in my life, talks about the stages of what he calls transformative social movements. And they begin when someone, he uses the example of Rosa Parks in the United States, is willing to take a public stand that says, I will no longer live outwardly in a way that denies the truth of what I know inwardly. So for her, it was that I am a human being with the same dignity and deserving of respect like anyone else. And no, I will not give up my seat on this bus. When that happens, other people who are feeling that same desire to live with a sense of congruence between what they inwardly know to be true and how they show up in the world, see that and begin to say, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one. And they begin to gravitate to each other and find each other in what he calls communities of congruence. And those are places where they can be affirmed in their deepest values, where they can be told, no, you're not crazy. You're not crazy to feel that love is the most important and necessary and powerful transformative agent in the universe. And where they can practice learning how to speak about what they know, what they care about, how to articulate what they value in a setting where they will be affirmed and nurtured rather than cut down. Which then leads to a natural kind of emergence into the public. But he says these communities are like a hothouse where plants have a chance to send down roots and develop a root system that is strong enough so that it can be transplanted into the harsher conditions of the world and still be able to survive and thrive. And that then eventually the larger systems can begin to undergo a transformation as well. So I think that that interspirituality is still at a place of communities of congruence, coming together, springing up. Yeah.
Yes, Diane, that is magnificent. What a beautifully optimistic and yet powerfully pragmatic answer to a very challenging period of human history that we are entering. And the call to, as individuals to take those stands and then to create those communities of congruence, which, as you were talking, I just couldn't help but think that what you have created in One Spirit Seminary is a magnificent example of those very communities that have been welcomed and trained and prepared to then go and be a blessing to the world. Deep congratulations and gratitude to you, Diane, for being for following your path. And I know you're very humble. What you and all of your collaborators have achieved and are achieving in One Spirit Seminary is a tremendous example of what's possible when the power of one, when we follow our path with courage and conviction and determination and also that quiet receptivity that's ready to, blossom and become and all of those. There's deep, profound wisdom in everything you've shared with us today. Diane Berke, I want to thank you for taking the time to sit down with us and to share your wisdom and blessings on your walk going forward and on the work of One Spirit Seminary and those 1,500 ministers, the trained that are out there doing their work in the world. I mean, that is limitless potential for impact. So thank you, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Ben. It's been my pleasure.